expertise was as competent and their design as
The title of the exhibition is In Search of Southeast Asia Through the M+ Collections. This idea of searching and trying to uncover or trying to find out what is Southeast Asia within the M+ collection. It includes artists, architects, designers, so it spans multiple different disciplines and in some way or another are related to Southeast Asia.
The three themes pretty much were derived from the affinities or the kind of topics that were commonly addressed from works from very different disciplines.
The first one is conditions of place. We were interested in how these different works or how these different artists are trying to in some way engage with their local context or environment and what that can tell you about that particular place.
I feel that the material gives me a voice. Material is kind of a necessity as an identification. But the joy of working with it, the joy of working with natural materials. The environment affects the way I work and the way I think, obviously. I live here, you know, I don't live anywhere else, I don't make my work anywhere else.
The Living Need Light, the new music isn't completely documentary and it isn't completely fictional. The history of contemporary art in Vietnam is very specific, and it's not like the history of contemporary art in Thailand. And you know, the proximity of these countries are, you know, very close, but the histories are kind of very, very different.
When I start to work on the film Riau, the basic research is about the original people of all these islands, and they call Orang Laut, the sea people. I talk a lot about if you don't know your history, you can only talk that much about your ancestor, about human life.
In Bangkok itself, you always have to share, certain space. I kind of like the way that people define space. That public space is occupied by a certain purpose.
Maybe they're dealing with looking at the histories of it, maybe they're taking something that is from their sort of everyday context, but each way that's a kind of response to particular conditions of that place.
For architecture and design, you'll see works that began in the late 50s up to today or even the future, which is dealing with the tropical condition. How that became a unifier for architects to respond and to say that this could also be the basis for a kind of our identity.
If you're able to relate the architecture to the climate, you start to develop architecture which is particular to that locality. But with particularity, you create, its own identity already.
We started working on this issue of, critical regionalism for Singapore, where we were working, and of course that immediately involves the climate, which in Singapore is tropical. You can't take all the received architecture from overseas. You really have to start from scratch, thinking how am I going to get cross-ventilation, and that affects all the organisation structures for the building.
Back in the Netherlands, there were many Dutch designers and artists who were reflecting on their own identity using design and art. So for me, when I came back, I wanted to apply that to Singaporeanness, a search of what is Singapore and what is the Singapore identity.
The second theme is called States and Powers. It's essentially meant to group together the works that we have that are in some way responding to state power, the idea of nationhood.
We have been very deliberate in acquiring works that actually spoke to that heroic period of architecture where architecture actually played the role of crafting a new independence, where architecture was really about kind of bolstering new institutions, whether it's new banks, new government buildings, or even just new kind of civic space.
In terms of KL Airport, that is after independence, Malaysia built quite a number of essential, important buildings. The airport was one.
Actually, I belong to the whole generation from this country that went overseas to become professionally competent so as to be useful at home. The milieu then towards government was already set. Although we were British subjects, we were part of the world to be relevant in our own country.
In Singapore, actually, we become kind of disconnected from the sea. People currently don't feel that close to the water. When you come to Singapore, you don't feel that you're on an island, actually. And water is a very sensitive subject, actually, in Singapore. It's a narrative that the state uses to, in a sense, to create a sense of like control and confidence in the people, actually, of Singapore.
Even if I believe that I do have the capacity to be a full-time artist, my conscience wouldn't let me do that because I feel that it's necessary to continue to be part of the larger and broader social movement here.
For the transnational flows, we wanted to highlight, in a sense, the fact that Southeast Asia is not necessarily tied to that geographic place. So you would have works by visual artists who kind of actively comment on this notion of migration or movement or circulation.
We are always very interested in the local specificity and how it's addressed, but also how it's part of a global flow of ideas. Good ideas cross borders. It's not bound by geographies.
Well, I was a modernist. Le Corbusier was a modernist. And I was part of the modern movement.
I was in Paris and I met Adrian Joffe. He's the president of Comedy Garçon. And I think he just made a passing comment, hey, we should do something together or something like that. So I took it as, okay, exciting totally, Adrian, let's do it. Good work have no geographical boundaries, you know. If you do good work, you know, people see it, people feel that they want to do good work with you. They expect you to do the same kind of good work together with them.
In a way, we realize that there's no one field or one way or one discipline that is sufficient to really shed light or illuminate a phenomenon or the nature of a place. That's why I think being able to kind of broaden our take of what is Southeast Asia via visual art, but contemporary practice, but also about historical architecture and design practice is something that kind of broadens your perspective.
I think this is a rare chance in which we're turning our attention to a new direction, which is looking southward. This just can bring up new kinds of questions and new ways of thinking about how Hong Kong is positioned in the world, how people in Hong Kong think of themselves as being related to, being connected to that region.